And then there's another very interesting thing that points to this genetic and biological dimension of purpose. This is, first of all, scientists now have defined this purpose as having the tendency to derive meaning from life's experiences and to possess a sense of intentionality and goal-directedness that guides their behavior. And they found, for example, that living one's purpose affects cellular activity in the brain and probably throughout the body. And in the brain, plaques and tangles that cause dementia and Alzheimer's still formed in these people, but having a purpose seem to increase the brain's protective reserve. Not only that, the stronger the purpose, the more it added to the reserve. And the Dalai Lama and Arthur C. Brooks wrote in the New York Times that Americans who prioritize doing good for others are almost twice as likely to say that they are very happy about their lives. In Germany, people who seek to serve society are 5 times likelier to say they are very happy than those who do not view service as important. And we know today from studies around Alzheimer's and dementia that there is 3 things that diminish or maybe even prevent or at least delay Alzheimer's and dementia. One is exercise. Vigorous exercise is very good. Second is good relationships. It's very important. And third is living your purpose. These are the 3 things. And so we're covering 2 here already in our training, and so the only other thing you need to do is get on your bike or swim or run or play tennis. It needs to be vigorous exercise, and you will be much happier and will be much healthier. So it's all great news, this purpose stuff. And my friend Jonathan Gustin, who taught me a lot early on and pointed me to a lot of things, he runs the Purpose Guide Institute, and we'll come back to him in a moment, in Marin County in Northern California. He went through the effort to look at a lot of studies that showed other health benefits that people who lived their transcendental purpose, again, they don't call it transcendental, but we will, have, like live 7 years longer, have healthier cell structures. I'm not going to read all this right now, but here you see studies starting in 1980 and up to 2015, and I'm sure he could add some more, maybe already added some more studies, that people who are in touch and living their transcendental purpose receive huge health benefits from that and are, as a consequence, also psychologically happier and healthier. So I don't think I need to say more why it makes sense to live our purpose. And some of you now go like, well, I'm the lucky one. I already feel I live my transcendental purpose and I recognize that I have all these health benefits. But a lot of people, and I've done my own little personal research by asking a lot of people, what do you feel most passionate and concerned about? What is your life's purpose? And most people don't know, right? Or they feel that their life purpose is just to live their biological purpose, right? And that's honorable and that's good, and that may even provide some of these health benefits, but this is not what we're talking about here. As I said, it's about creating more good, truth, beautiful and functioning in the world that is in service of our biological purpose and the well-being of others. And so as I was studying this purpose stuff, I came across several books that I'm going to show you in a moment that instruct people and support people to identify their transcendental purpose, and they have different methods how to do that. And after writing for a while, I realized they fall into 4 categories. And I named them Autobiographical method, based on Tim Kelly's book, an absent method, an ego-transcending methods, and ego-affirming methods. So these are 4 methods, and I'll just for a few minutes show you the different approaches, and if you're interested, the books that describe these different methods. So autobiographical works for people who had already experiences in their life that made them happy, joyful, fulfilled, successful, in the flow of life over an extended period of time. But they also had times when that wasn't the case, and maybe something distracted them. Maybe they got pregnant or in a relationship or had some hardship or were just misguided out for some reasons, or maybe weren't so successful in living their purpose and gave up on it or thought they're crazy, whatever. But this is one way of reconnecting with your purpose and then finding ways to enact it in a successful way. And these guides often say, follow your bliss and what makes you feel alive, or follow your heart. You probably have heard that a lot, right? Do what you want to do, follow your bliss, follow what makes you feel alive, follow your heart. And here is where I have the biggest problem. If you're watched Breaking Bad, for example, Walter White, right, the drug dealer, the killer, a real bad person. In the last or the second before last episode, he meets his wife again, and she says, well, Walter, don't tell me that you did this for me and the family, right, because you ruined our life. And Walter White finally says, yeah, I admit I didn't do it for the family. I did it for myself because it made me feel alive, right? And so I think there are a lot of people in the world who feel very alive, robbing people, killing people, raping people, abusing people, right? They're not creating goodness, truth, beauty, or functioning in service of others and the biological purpose, and still they feel they follow their bliss and they do what makes them feel alive, and maybe they, like the Nazis and others, actually justify that with some, metaphysical notions of that this is their evolutionary purpose or something like that, or their unique purpose, and so I'm very critical, right? But it can work for some people. And here is our two books. One is Tim Kelly's True Purpose. So if you never studied anything around purpose and are really curious, this is a very good starting point. From what I read, I really love what he put together here in this. It's a small book, also like 120 pages, 150 pages. I learned a lot from this book. And then there is also relatively famous Don Clifton's Strength Finder, which is now published by Gallup, and they have these websites and tests and groups and stuff. And this is really, they have long tests where you can find out where your strengths are, kind of in an orange way, right? In a business success-oriented, financial success status-oriented world. Also very fascinating. Then there's the absent method, and this is good for people who have no idea what their purpose is, and maybe they're never looking back in their life drawing a blank, right, what they felt passionate and concerned about. And so there you've reached more into your subconscious or unconscious, back to the root. What activities and people did you feel drawn to as a child, maybe, right? Early on, maybe there was some things that impressed you that you felt drawn to, but then you got sidetracked and you were discouraged, or you were not allowed to develop the skills, which was a bit the case when I grew up and I was forced to become an electrician instead of being a musician and a chef, what I felt I wanted to do. And then you can say, well, what was I able to express and what not? I was also always a good writer, but I was dyslexic, and so I was discouraged from writing because I made so many spelling mistakes, and my handwriting, since I'm not very kinesthetic, looked horrible, even though the content that I produced was fairly good. What pains you the most in the world, right? If you think about the world, what do you think is really not working very well and creates suffering for you and others? And this is often a pointer what you want to move towards to, where you're your greatest passion and the greatest pain kind of like intersect with each other. And Roy Bhaskar calls that, what absences do you want to absent, right? Where do you think something is missing? There isn't enough fill in the blank in the world, and you want to, cure that ill. You want to bring this to the world. And what is your vision and contribution for a better world? So this requires to go a little deeper. And there is again Tim Kelly. He has these two methods. And then The Soul's Code by James Hillman, a New York bestseller, In Search of Character and Calling. And then a guy in Southern California, a retired lawyer, I think, totally unknown, I would say, wrote this really beautiful workbook that I bought, What Were You Born to Do? And I'm really a little surprised or frustrated that this book isn't a bigger bestseller. I think he has a lot to offer, and he teaches on the side these finding your purpose trainings, weekend trainings. And then the Purpose Guide in the Institute, as I mentioned, they train purpose guides, and here is like the very broad strokes from their website, purposeguides.org, purpose-octagon, where they have these 8 steps of defining your vision, your values, your core powers, your essence, your giveaway, your tasks, your messaging, and your delivery systems. So you can read more about that on Jonathan's website if you're interested, and maybe even sign up for one of his courses and trainings if you want to go deep with exploring what your purpose is using the absent method. And then the third method is the ego transcending method. And there you may ask yourself, who am I if I'm not my body, not my thoughts, not my feelings, not my experiences? Right? What is alive in you right now in this moment without pain of the past or fear of the future? Or to put it with Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching, which he wrote 600 years before Christ, so 2,620 years ago, roughly, do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? So here we see this is not a new idea. This has been experienced by humans probably way beyond human history, this getting in touch with something that's beyond the biological purpose. And here we have a whole slew of books. And I think the most fascinating, at least for me, most surprising book is this book by Rick Warren that maybe you heard about. He's a LA pastor in the Valley, has a church there, and he wrote this book, What on Earth Am I Here For? The Purpose-Driven Life. And it now, I looked it up recently, I think it now sold over 50 million copies, about whatever, 20, 30, 40 times as much as Eckhart Tolle, for example, sells. And it's a real interesting book to read, to understand the mythic stage fairly well. And I think he has some really good advice in there, which is, in a nutshell, transcend your ego, put yourself in service of other Christians. So not all people, right, but other Christians, and live God's will. And Rick Warren then explains to you what God wants from you. So that's also a bit of a hilarious part, right, where he puts himself into this, like, well, I know what God wants, and I'll tell you what God wants. But apparently over 50 million people already wanted to know from Rick Warren what God wants, and it's not bad, right? This is by and large, put yourself into the service of others. And it's also translated into many different languages. Then for Orange and Beyond, I really like the Theory U process from Otto Scharmer. And if you look there, it says from ecosystems to ecosystem economics. Right? It's also get beyond your ego and put yourself in service of creating sustainable economics, economic systems. And a very interesting process, and this Theory U process. Then Bill Plotkin, Nature and the Human Soul, Cultivating Wholeness and Community in a Fragmented World. He early on in the book says we need to move from egocentric to ecocentric. Right? So this is more green, more environmentally oriented. Sharma is more business oriented in the widest sense, but they also touch on the environment. You see the earth there. So these are two great books. Then Eckhart Tolle, probably most of you know the title A New Earth, but then the subtitle is Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. So Eckhart also caught on to this Tao Te Ching idea, or drew from there, that when we awaken and become present, that is a better chance that we get in touch to live our purpose, even though he's not exactly an activist, but he becomes more and more of an activist, I noticed recently. And then Andrew Cohen's book that had this impact on me, Evolutionary Enlightenment, and also with this problem that it's kind of like, get the ego out of the way and just follow whatever wants to emerge through you. And it's painfully a miss, right, of these checks and balances, so to speak, of goodness, truth, beauty, and functioning. Of course, he's not suggesting overtly that you do harm to the world, but as we know, was at least very anti-relationship, anti-procreation, and things like that. And then The Diamond Approach by A.A. Chalmers, and there's probably 100 other books that, in the widest sense, teach people this ego-transcending method, not always, to live this transcendental purpose, but often, it's all about purpose. And then finally, we have the ego-affirming methods. And there you ask yourself, what are my limiting beliefs about myself and how God or the universe wants to work through me? What am I afraid of to fully shine my light into the world? Who am I not to be powerful, brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? And if that resonates with you, you probably have heard of people like Marianne Williamson or Jean Houston, or the whole feminine power work is very much related to that. Partly, and we'll talk about her in a moment, Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I just realized that Mark Gaffney is also kind of like, promoting this kind of idea that we're this, giants within, these super powerful people, and we're just holding back. And what I found fascinating is if you look at these books here, except with the exception of Katrin Kaufer, who was a co-author with Otto Scharmer, all these other books are written by males. And when we get to the ego-affirming methods, they're mainly females who promote these ego-affirming methods. As Ken Wilber sometimes said, men should do prostrations and women should stand up. Right? So it seems that often women have all these talents, but they're a little bit more timid in putting them out there in the world, and men maybe are sometimes a little bit too overconfident and maybe need to be a little bit more humble. But I found that interesting, that there is a gender difference in approaches to living, identifying and living talent. Another method, it's maybe not as deep, but also a start, is just to think about what do you love to do, what do you do well, what does the world pay you for, and what does the world need. And that's sometimes wrongly, somebody pointed it out, referred to as the Japanese ikigai, even though that was a Westerner guy who came up with that, and then he called it the ikigai, maybe a little bit inspired by ikigai. But this is another method you may want to look at. And I'll say it up front here, and somebody even called me in one of the previous sessions on it. A woman said, well, Martin, why is it all about making money, right? And I said, well, it's not about making money, really. It's creating a better world. But most people need to make money unless you're independently wealthy, or what I've seen more in women than in men, but also the other way around, is that some people who feel a strong calling towards what they love to do and what the world needs, but who don't get paid, and sometimes they're not really good at what they do, that they're looking for partners who are good at what they do and what the world pays them for, and then they feel that's sort of like a good partnership, right, where one partner even may do things in the world that the world doesn't need, right? They're kind of like destructive, and then they use part of that income so that the other partner then can do what they love to do and to try to fix part of the stuff that was done by the other one who did what he or she did well and what the world paid for. So that's not my idea of a transcendental couple where one is in these two circles on the right and the other one acts in the two circles on the left. For me, it's where both partners take responsibilities and have the rights to do what they do well, what the world pays for and what the world needs and what they love. And it's also notable that these four circles correlate with the four quadrants, that what you love to do is in the upper left, what you do well in the upper right, what the world pays for in the lower right, and what the world needs in the lower left. So these people, the person who put this together probably wasn't integrally informed, but anyone who looks at our human experience usually comes back necessarily to these four very broad dimensions because they're in our genes, right? It's part of human nature. And so I have two more things before I stop yakking and invite you into a breakout and invite your questions if you have any before. One is related to depth of expression. And Joanna Macy is also a really fantastic purpose guide and purpose coach, an older lady, environmental, political, feminist activist. And after I wrote this, I found that she also had thought along these lines. And Brian Wetton, this teacher I mentioned earlier, also thinks along these lines that some people manifest their transcendental purpose on the gross level, which means either the material, physical level or the level of the body, right? So these are people who make stuff or support people in having functional bodies, right? So a body worker or a doctor or something like that, right? Who works on the physical material level of evolution. And then there are people who work more on the subtle level. These are people who help people with learning and information. So they may be coaches or teachers or people who write books, nonfiction books and things, or maybe even entertaining, right? Comedians and things like that. So people who basically work with the mind of other people at the level of information gathering, journalists, etc. Right? So that would be the subtle level. Then people who work on the causal level, they work in the broadest sense on people's happiness. So they're therapists or some other forms of people who work on healing the unconscious and selling more or less in the broadest sense, not information, but happiness. So the subtle level usually also sells success, right? The causal level sells happiness, and then the pure witness level, they really work on the source, on enlightenment in the widest sense, on the spiritual level. And then people who integrate all the four previous levels, they're so like working on a non-dual level. So if somebody is a tantra teacher, for example, or an integral relationship teacher, right, we work on the material, the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual level. Because of course all of these levels show up when we get into a relationship or come into contact with another person when we get into relationship. And I just want to note something real quick. If you're looking at this, it becomes harder and harder to make a living the more you come to the bottom. So the easiest way to make a living is by helping people with their physical pain, or to offer them something where they invest some money and eventually they make more money than they paid you, right? So if you sell someone a car and then they can make money with this car, they are more happy to hand over the cash than people who say, well, you got to learn these things, right? Come to my university or read this book and things like that. So, but this is still relatively easy on the subtle level to sell. And at the causal level, it gets a little harder because, happiness is of course important, but people often don't want to pay for being happier. They rather stay in their victim role or in their pain, or don't deal with the sources of their unhappiness, which can mean that they have to relive some of the painful earlier childhood experiences. And they go like, why the hell would I want to re-experience this pain to become free? And of course, we know that spiritual teachers have probably the hardest time, with a very few exceptions, to make a living doing what they do. And when I was in the training with Eckhart, that was actually kind of a topic. When we were teaching something spiritual, non-material, right, and non-attachment, non-desire, non-delusion, and then we're asking money for that. That seemed to, for some people, a contradiction. Of course, there are some teachers who say you shouldn't be attached to your money, give it all to me, and then they buy some Rolls Royces with it or other stuff. Anyway, just a little side note. And then non-dual is probably in the middle, because you provide people with some gross and subtle, which they're more interested in paying for, and then you also slip in the causal and the pure witness stuff. And then one more slide about callings. So when you ask people, what is your purpose? What do you feel concerned and passionate about? How do you help to make the world a better place? It's like, I would say about 90% of people don't know what to say about that, or say something very superficial. And then some people mention something where they feel called to maintain or conserve something. And a lot of Eastern spiritual teachers are often working in a lineage, for example. They're just passing down one-on-one the teaching of their teachers, and their teachers had it passed down from their teachers, and so on and so forth, all the way back to the Buddha, let's say. So that's all the maintaining, conserving, stepping in someone else's footsteps, maintaining a family business, or just continuing to make, follow some ancient traditions, or be a shaman or whatever. And then some people are called to innovate or improve. So there is already something there. Somebody already had the idea of the internet, or cell phones, or shoes, or mousetraps, or Buddhist meditation, but they improve it. They add on to it, and they innovate. And then there are the most daring people and the most crazy people. These are the ones who really invent, who come up with totally new stuff. They live on the edge of evolution, if you will. The absent absences. They manifest something into the world that nobody ever had heard of before. And truth be told, most of these people fail because nobody else thought about it, and it's usually very hard. And you have to have, as somebody said, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But as we know, with many inventors, they often had ideas that only caught on long after they died, or they became famous years later. And somebody says, wow, 100 years ago, they already thought about this, what we're doing now, or what they created a long time ago becomes popular much later. But if you succeed, right, and then you get a Nobel Prize, and it can become very, very famous. So if you feel called to that, you're either brilliant or stupid, I sometimes say. And I had these thoughts as I was developing some ideas. Then I went like, Martin, are you completely crazy having these thoughts that apparently nobody else ever had before? Or are you brilliant and you go to this through these ups and downs, right, of being really insecure and questioning yourself and being full of doubt and things like that. Gandhi, for example, was full of doubt, right? In hindsight, of course, he's revered as the inventor of non-violence, but if you read his biographies, he was full of doubt if what he does is crazy, right, and does in the end more harm than good. And often you don't know until you really try. So it's good to know in which category you fall. And I feel often I fall a bit in the crazy category. And also when we talk about sharing your purpose with a partner, that your partner has the same depth of expression and the same type of calling. And then a few final words before we do breakouts is that sometimes people say, well, Martin, yeah, I think I already had 5 different purposes in my life. And it always shifted. And then when I talk to them a little bit and ask them questions, I usually can see that it's all built around a certain talent or certain talents that they developed, right? Because you still need to practice a lot to really become good at something. And the purpose is not your expression, right? If I would say my purpose seems to bring people together to co-create, right? That's a very broad definition of my purpose, but I always had a knack and found a lot of joy for bringing people together to co-create what we're doing here, in a sense. And then the expressions in my life had at least 3 phases. One was to bring people together to play music in bands. And often when I left, the bands fell apart. I just knew who is a good musical fit, from the skills, but also from the personality. And then I brought people together in my business, and we connected developers of products with customers of products, and connecting musicians and creative people with technology. And I had a company with 20 employees or so. And then in my last 20 years of my life, I started Power of Now group and Singles to Couples group, and now do this integral relationship vision stuff where I bring people together. So that these are the different expressions. So the expression is not your purpose. It's the underlying driver, your underlying concerns, your underlying passion, right, that is based in the underlying talent. So for some people, they can work backwards, but other people have to work themselves from the left to right. What are actually my talents that I was able to develop, or maybe not develop, and need to develop now in order to live my purpose? And then what is the broad purpose, and what is then the precise expression? And often I hear things like, oh, well, I think my purpose is to bring more love into the world, or to work with children, or to save animals or something. It's very, very broad. And they usually are not able to live their purpose because it's just, not focused enough. And so I found these mind maps. I like to make mind maps when I have meetings with my team. And here you see, let's say you want to solve global warming, you may want to do a mind map and put everything down, right, that causes global warming and that could alleviate, or now we call it climate change, right? And then find and see, oh, I feel more drawn, or I have more connections or more talent in one of these areas. And then you want to focus on something where you're really good and what you love to do, and what the world needs from you, and what the world will also pay you for. So this is where you narrow it down and you come to the expression. And as we saw earlier with Jonathan Gustin, right, he also has this path from very broad to then focusing it on something and then create a vision and mission statement. And we're not doing that here in the training, but in the book I outlined how to do that, how to create a mission statement with strategies and goals and execution and things like that from my old business world. training. And here's another one around energy saving. And here's another one around health. And here's a one about plastic detox. And if you are a little unaware, maybe where there are still problems in the world, and some things are really getting better. A lot of things are getting better in the world because people live their transcendental purpose, but we're still having problems. Here is what a Millennium Project, which comes out once a year, big studies about progress and where we're making progress, where we're regressing, where new problems emerge, like drugs and human trafficking and upward distribution of wealth and global warming are some things where things are not getting better. Other areas, things are already getting better. Or here the UNICEF also have 17, how many are these? 15 areas. They have 17 areas. Just if you're have a little lack of inspiration where you may be able to make a difference in the world, here are some suggestions.